Good afternoon, Gil. Can you hear me?
I think we are on live now, Senator.
Oh, okay, great.
Everyone's on.
Okay, I'm
So
sorry.
we'll start. I know your time is precious, so
My time is your time.
thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Gil Staley, Chief Executive Officer of the Woodlands Area Economic Development Partnership. The EDP is honored to co-host this event today with the Woodlands Area Chamber. And again, JJ Hollie's representing them as their CEO and president. Just a quick reminder, attendees, please keep your audio on mute and your video function off in order to have the four speakers you see before you on the screen. Please note that this call is being recorded and shared. Our panel this afternoon consists of course, Senator John Cornyn, Tim Jeffcoat, Houston District Director of the U.S. Small Business Administration, and JJ Hollie, President and CEO of the Woodlands Area Chamber. We're grateful today, of course, to have Senator Cornyn with us. He has served Texas as a judge, as Attorney General, and now as our senior U.S. Senator. He's earned the reputation as an articulate and powerful voice for Texans. He's known for reaching across the aisle and get things done, as he did, of course, for the CARES Act, which he will talk about now. So please join me in welcoming, I'm sure there's a round of applause going across right now, Senator Cornyn. Thank you for joining us again.
Well, thank you, Gil. Appreciate it. The introduction and be able to join you. And thanks also to JJ Hollie and his team at the Chamber for organizing this call. As you can imagine, we've all gotten a lot better at Zooming and Skyping during this time spent at home and sheltering in place and maintaining social distancing, along with good personal hygiene, washing our hands a lot. But I thought it'd be good for me to just go over some of the legislating that we've been doing in Washington before we adjourned. And the last bill was called the CARES Act. And Tim Jeffcoat is with us, and he'll be able to help talk through some of the details on the Paycheck Protection Program, which I'll mention briefly as well. But if you'd told me 2 or 3 months ago that I'd end up voting for a $2.2 trillion piece of legislation and that it would be unanimously passed in the Senate, I wouldn't have believed it. But obviously our country is really on a war footing. This is a national emergency, and from a public health standpoint and from an economic impact standpoint. So Congress had to do what it did, and it's not perfect. And anytime you do anything this big and this complex, this quickly, there are going to be some problems, but that's where you all can continue to give us feedback and help us smooth through some of those kinks and fill in some of those gaps, and hopefully make sure that the needs aren't going unmet. But the CARES Act has already brought about $2.4 million in recovery grants to Montgomery County, with more going to surrounding cities and counties. But let's talk first about the healthcare response. We know that that our hospitals have been asked to defer elective surgery so they have capacity in case there's a surge of patients who need to fill the ICUs and perhaps even be ventilated. Not everybody's going to have to go to the hospital, thank goodness, but the most vulnerable, the elderly, and the people with underlying disease or comorbidities, as they call them, are going to need that hospital available. So we've appropriated $100 billion for hospitals, and the first $30 billion of that has just gone out. I do know that there's still, that because of the suspension of elective surgery, there's some major hospitals who are laying people off now, which is unfortunate, to be sure. And I think perhaps you'll hear more from Governor Abbott and perhaps from the president about that topic going forward. But especially after we have shown that we're bending the curve by mitigation tactics. But one of the first thing that I heard from Governor Abbott about is we need more personal protective equipment. We need more testing. Well, one of the lessons this virus is teaching us is not to depend on China for our medical equipment or our pharmaceuticals. And that's something that's going to have a long-term impact. In the meantime, we've geared up and from a number of different sources, and now the federal government is trying to make sure that this PPE, this personal protective equipment, is available for our frontline healthcare providers and our law enforcement. But at the same time we're doing that, we are in a race to do clinical trials to see what kind of treatment will help address this virus when people get it. And that requires double-blind studies and takes some time, but there is literally a worldwide race to try to come up with a treatment. In the meantime, there's also a worldwide race to come up with a vaccine. And hopefully, after the end of this year, we'll be more in a place like we are with seasonal flu, where people can get a vaccine and not worry so much, although I expect that we will, some aspects of our personal lives will not change. I hope they don't, in terms of personal hygiene and maintaining social distancing and those sorts of things. I think that's going to be an interesting development after we return to the new normal. So talking about money to people who need it, of course, a lot of folks got their place of business shut down through no fault of their own because they worked in the hospitality industries, bars, restaurants, hotels, where there is no demand anymore. And so especially I'm thinking about people who work on an hourly paycheck, hourly wage for their paycheck or tips. We felt like it was really important to get money to them as quickly as possible as a first lifeline. And so early this week, if it hadn't already arrived, if a family of four with a household income of up to $150,000 can receive a maximum of $3,400 in a cash payment. Now, a lot of that's been already direct deposited in people's accounts, bank accounts. I've been getting anecdotal reports back, but hopefully the rest of it should arrive this week. That is supposed to be there so people can pay for the necessities of life, food, shelter, and the like while we wait for the next reinforcements. That next level of reinforcements are our unemployment insurance system. But as you know, the Texas Workforce Commission has been crushed by the volume of applications that have been made. But they are working through that, trying to increase their capacity to process those applications. The good news is your benefits are paid retroactively from the time you lost your employment, not when your application is approved, but we need to make sure we continue to stay after it and get those benefits delivered to those who qualify. We've actually expanded the eligibility to include independent contractors and some nonprofits, and we've expanded the duration of the benefits for an additional 13 weeks through the end of the year. And we've also added, on top of the state benefit, a $600 a week federal benefit for the next 4 months. So as you can see, these first two tranches of relief are designed to give people what they need to cover their expenses until the smoke clears, while we try to stabilize the economy as much as we can. Well, when you talk about stabilizing the economy, it's all about small businesses, and that's where the Paycheck Protection Program comes in through SBA certified lenders. Now, many of you already know about that. Many of you hopefully have already applied and received commitments for loans. Actually, there was $350 billion initially appropriated in the CARES Act. That actually was depleted effective today. And hopefully negotiations are underway to replenish that account with another $250 billion, because unfortunately, I think there are probably a lot of businesses that waited to see what happened. Maybe they didn't have the professional staff to help them apply earlier. They were just waiting to see what happened in this new and brand new program. And it would be tragic if Congress did not replenish that account to allow them to benefit. But here's the goal of the Paycheck Protection Program. It's to encourage and incentivize employers to the extent they can to keep their payroll current until June. This will go to June, that's the requirement. And if they do, then the money that they have borrowed in this 1% interest loan to cover payroll and rent and the like, if they keep their payroll intact until June, then the loan can be completely forgiven. Banks began accepting applications on April the 3rd. And as I said, it's been enormously successful despite a few bumps at the beginning, but there'll be another attempt to pass it as soon as this afternoon. And I'm hopeful we'll have success, because this is one part of the program that works enormously well. As you can imagine, it's hard to spend $2.2 trillion. And a lot of the money we've appropriated, like for hospitals, we've gotten $30 billion out the door, but it's not a time, in my opinion, to add on to those sort of payments. We need to get the money out the door that we've appropriated and learn from this experience and where there are gaps and where there are unintended consequences. Finally, for medium and large businesses, this bill also provides $500 billion for the Treasury's Economic Stabilization Fund to offer as a source of capital. $46 billion of this will go to specific industries like the airlines, cargo air carriers, and the like, and as well as those necessary for maintaining national security. $454 billion will provide loans for qualifying businesses, states, and municipalities through the Federal Reserves. Again, the goal is, once we defeat this virus, once we bring down the curve, once there's no longer a threat to surges of patients in our hospitals that overwhelm their capacity, our goal is to make sure that the businesses and the jobs that were there before this virus hit are still there when this crisis passes. So I know my staff has been in touch with many of you to talk about the process to apply. And as I said, we have Tim Jeffcoat here from the SBA who can answer questions and add any details. And then finally, many of you know Jay Guerrero in my Houston office, and I encourage you to reach out to him if we can be of help. Again, thanks to all of my friends there for organizing this call. And Gil, I'll kick it back to you, and I'll be happy to answer or dodge a couple questions.
Thank you again very much, Senator. We'll go into Q&A, and we received several questions in advance, and we'll try to get them all within this time frame of our call. Any questions that we don't get to, we will submit to the Senator's office on your behalf of those that issued the questions. This is coming from a restaurateur here in the Woodlands, and talking about the PPP. Tim may expand on this also. There's currently an 8-week process from the loan originating date to use the funds for payroll. With restaurants, of course, are closed now, and it will take some time to get them fully back open, according to the question here. And he's asking if there's any consideration to extend that 8-week period for just the restaurant sector.
Yeah, it's one of those unintended consequences, Gil. We were trying to be helpful, but didn't realize we were creating a problem for the very people we were trying to help. And so I know that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin is trying to exercise maximum flexibility in the way that Congress wrote this law. My hope would be that for those who, in good faith, enter into these loans, that Congress will come back and tweak this, and to make sure that as long as people were exercising their good faith and trying to implement the program, that Congress would not be an impediment, and that we would fix that. But we will be returning to Washington on May the 4th, and at least that's the current plan. And that's an example of the type of thing that we probably need to clean up.
Thank you very much. So the next question, talking about our great state of Texas, it appears that our numbers associated with the virus are relatively benign given our population. Do you have any comment on that?
Sure. Well, and that's why I think Governor Abbott was wise not to issue a statewide directive because we're a big, diverse state. And as I always say, in some places we have more cows than people, some counties.
Yeah.
So social distancing is not a problem in those places. But where we're seeing the outbreak of this virus is in congested areas, New York City being the best example of that, or the worst example of that. And I know Mayor Johnson and Mayor in Dallas and Mayor Turner in Houston, they're seeing bigger numbers, which you would expect with a more easily communicable disease because of people not able to social distance or not in time. So I think wisely we leave these decisions to the local officials operating with guidance from the state and from the federal government. The thing the federal government can provide is the guidance and the resources and the logistics to get this done. But as you know, most of this, the heavy lifting has to occur at the local level. So I think just as we close down based on directives from mayors and judges, county judges, and the governor, we're going to reopen the same way, but we'll do so gradually in a way that doesn't risk another spike in cases. But the other thing is right now under CDC guidelines, Center for Disease Control, you're really not eligible for a test until you experience symptoms and you're referred by your doctor or your healthcare provider. That's mainly a limitation because of the number of tests available. As tests become more widely available, I would expect that more people will get tested. We'll probably learn that more people actually had the virus and didn't know about it because they weren't symptomatic. And then that will lead to the further tests of things like serology tests that will allow us to identify people who've actually got the virus and developed immunities because they have antibodies present in their blood, which will then give us another pathway for people to re-enter the workforce. So I wouldn't be spiking the football yet, but I think as long as we do our job personally in terms of social distancing, in terms of personal hygiene, we can help bring down that curve, and eventually, on the good advice of our public health experts and others, begin to gradually get back to work.
Well, thank you. The next question is coming from a commercial real estate group here in the area, and depending on, very much so, on oil and gas as a tenant. Do you see the price changing at all in the short term?
Well,
still hovering around 20.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Saudis and the Russians decided at the worst of all times to begin to glut the world markets with more oil. And of course, the fundamental problem is because there's a reduced economic activity, there's reduced demand. And so we literally have a glut of oil, hence the low prices, which are unsustainable for most of our folks in the energy sector. So I had a meeting at the White House 2 weeks ago with Senator Cruz and a number of our major energy producers in Texas and around the country. And the president brought the Saudis to the negotiating table along with the Russians, and they reached an agreement to cut production by almost 10 million barrels a day. The problem is there's a reduction in about 25 million barrels a day in demand. And so while this is helpful, it's not a complete answer. So I think what the complete answer is, we need to bring that production under some reasonable control, but then we also need to see the economies begin to open up and more demand occur. In the meantime, I know it's a tough time for folks in the energy sector. This is really an incredible industry that has made us essentially self-sufficient when it comes to energy and exporting it to the world. So it's really painful to watch, but I think we've taken care, at least right now, for the Saudis and the Russians and on that production side. But still, I think what we need to see is the economies around the world open up and increase consumption so that we don't have as much surplus oil with no place to go.
Next question is from a nonprofit, a 501c3. beyond CARES, certainly the PPP and EIDL, what other support could there be out there during this pandemic?
Well, we talked about support for individuals, unemployment insurance, and direct financial assistance. The two major programs are the PPP program and EIDL you mentioned. Tim can expand upon that, available through the Small Business Administration, but also this lending facility that has been stood up through the Federal Reserve, which will make collateralized loans for a longer period of time to give businesses the liquidity they need to get through this tough period. Those were the major components of what Congress came up with in the CARES Act, along with support for our healthcare providers and the like. But if there are other suggestions any of you have about things we need to do, we are more than willing to take those back to the negotiating table when we come up with another piece of legislation. I'm confident this will not be the last bill that we pass relative to the recovery from the coronavirus.
Good news. This is from one of our longtime residential real estate agents here in the Woodlands, concerned about the timing and the reopening of Texas businesses. Can you speak to that?
Well, today, President Trump announced a group of members of Congress who are part of the reopening task force. I'm proud to be one of those members. And I've been talking to Governor Abbott's team, as well as Lieutenant Governor Patrick's team, about their efforts. I think this is something where we're all going to have to do this together. But again, based on local conditions, I think there are parts of Texas that probably can begin to open up gradually, along with appropriate protocols and social distancing and the like. For example, I talked to some of the restaurant folks, and they said that they would probably, when they be reopened, be able to remove every other table and to provide more space for people to be protected, along with their usual sanitation and protocols that they use at restaurants anyway. But I think life is going to be a little bit different. You know, when I walked into the White House for that meeting about the Saudi oil glut, I had my temperature taken before I went on the grounds. I had one of these nasal swab quick tests that got results back in a few minutes. And then when I walked into the cabinet room where the president was, everybody was spaced apart with appropriate distancing. And then before I got in the cabinet room where the president was, they took my temperature again. I think this speaks to the kinds of things that we're going to have to continue to do until we develop a cure from these clinical trials, as well as a vaccine.
The remaining questions, as I look over them, Senator, you have addressed very adequately. And unless you have anything else, we're almost to your time restriction.
Okay. Well, thanks, Gil. Let me thank all of you for joining today, and thank you all for hosting. I hope this has been helpful. If there's additional information you need, I know Tim's here to answer some questions, and my office is available to you at any time, as am I. But just my words of encouragement to all of you is we are going to get through this together. This is a challenge, but for a region that went through Hurricane Harvey and came out of this by helping each other and working together, we're going to come out of this just fine. But we are going to learn some very important lessons that hopefully will prevent something like this from happening again. So thanks for letting me join you. You'll have a great day.
Thank you very much, Senator. So it's my pleasure now to turn the next part of the program over to JJ Hollie, who will bring on Tim Jeffcoat with SBA. JJ, it's your show.
All right, thank you, Gil. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tim Jeffcoat. He is the Director of the United States Small Business Administration in Houston. He oversees SBA programs and services in Houston and the surrounding 32 counties of Texas. Most of Tim's career has been private sector leadership roles in international business, marketing, and business development. Tim's career has required international assignments and global responsibilities. So, Mr. Jeffcoat, thank you for being here, and welcome to the call.
Thank you, JJ and Gil and Ashley. Appreciate you having me. I'm hoping everybody is well, continuing to do well, and that your businesses get through this just fine.
All right. Thank you, Tim. So we'll go ahead and jump in. We have some pre-submitted questions this afternoon. And again, like Gil said, if we run out of time, we will submit those questions to both Senator Cornyn's office and to the SBA to get your answers.
Good.
Tim, the first question I have is, what is the timing of funding under the EIDL, or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and why was it changed to be based on headcount? Early in the process, many small businesses and sole proprietors felt like that assistance plan was a great option for them, but we've heard no funding under that program. And now with the grant portion of that program being changed to based upon headcount, that leaves sole proprietors and independent contractors with no substantial assistance from that program, and they may be late to the PPP process.
Okay. Well, so far as the economic injury disaster loan, so I guess the first question was, what's the timing with that? If you can use an oxymoron like a normal disaster, under a normal disaster, you apply for the economic injury disaster loan. Within about a week, you're going to hear from an SBA person that may be pursuing some additional information, or otherwise are going to be getting with you to start working on the estimate for how much money you need. Within 4 weeks, that is typically wrapped up, and we are ready to start dispersing money to you. That was changed for the COVID, so that at the time you apply, you have the opportunity of choosing to also get an advance or a grant. I'm not sure how this occurred, but I can tell you my office, from the day that transpired, it was always up to $10,000. So there was some miscommunication out there that made people think it was always $10,000, and that is incorrect. I'm not sure how that was perpetuated, but it wasn't from us. But still, the idea that it isn't good for a sole proprietor, the economic injury disaster loan is actually an excellent choice. Typically, that's in the case of COVID disaster, that's going to fund you for up to 6 months. So if you pursue an economic injury disaster loan, once approved and dispersed to you, those payments should continue, and you should get support for probably a 4 to 6 month time frame, depending on how long this whole COVID disaster lasts. In the case of PPP, that is only for 8 weeks. So there's a pretty significant difference. Now, another significant difference that a lot of people have noted is that with PPP, you can achieve forgiveness. So you can have up to 100% of whatever amount you are approved for forgiven, as long as you spend it in the way that it is asked to be spent, which is mainly for payroll. With economic injury disaster loan, that is an outright loan, so you do have to pay it back, but it is generally over an up to 30-year period. So a lot of the people that have gotten EIDL funding have been over 30 years. That's like another mortgage. So that's stretching it out for as long as we can to make it as affordable as possible so that your business can recover. So both PPP and economic injury disaster loan, both of those have their place. Sometimes it's together, sometimes it's separate. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Tim. And if you want to, can you just give us a quick summary of the difference between the EIDL or EIDL loan and the PPP program? Because you hit on there's a 30-year loan repayment with EIDL. PPP is different, and there's some very big differences in those two different programs.
Okay, yeah, let me give you kind of a snapshot. Economic injury disaster loan program has been around for a long time. So I don't know how long, at least 10 years, because that's how long I've been around. But the economic injury disaster loan is up to $2 million. For a business, it is 3 3/4% interest. That's pretty cheap, and up to 30 years. And as I said, in most cases, it will be 30 years. So that covers a large variety of businesses. That includes farms and ranches, which aren't normally covered by SBA. That includes faith-based organizations, which are not normally covered by SBA. It includes things like chambers, 501(c)(d)s are covered by the economic injury disaster loan. So a wide range of nonprofits. It's a really versatile loan. People ask, how much do I ask for? If it's up to $2 million, how much do I ask for? You don't. What you do is you give us basically what your annual revenues are, your annual operating costs, and then we formulate a loan amount that we think will get you through the disaster period. It isn't meant for refinancing existing debt. It's not meant for purchasing new equipment. It's meant for keeping you going, keeping your people employed, and keeping you in operation. And in the event you can't be in operation because of a stay-at-home order, or your county has closed down your business until further notice because of the COVID disaster, you can still keep all of your people paid, even though they will be at home. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. The PPP is brand new to the world. It came into existence, I'm looking at a calendar, on April 3rd, so roughly 14 days ago. And in those 14 days, what that was meant to do is leverage the strength of the existing network of banks and other lenders that work with the SBA. So why is that special, Tim? Because those bankers understand how to do what's called government guaranteed lending, and most of them do what's called delegated lending, which means we let them use their own systems, their own paperwork, their own notes, everything, so that they can use all that to be as fast as possible. So this PPP is up to $10 million, but it's only for 2 years. That's not counting the forgiveness. 2 years at 1% interest. So it's super cheap. It is only for 2 years. The great thing about it is the forgiveness. Let's say that your loan wound up being $1 million. What we are looking for you to do is, in the 8 weeks following you receiving that money, you're going to spend that $1 million on keeping your head count the same as it was for the last year, and the wages the same as they were for the last year. Point being, we want to put you exactly where you would have been with your head count and with your salaries, so that we protect the paychecks of the people that work for you. In addition to paychecks or payroll, with the PPP, it can cover your rent, it can cover your mortgage interest, and it can cover utilities. But very importantly, it's not going to cover all of the other costs you might have. So if you're a manufacturing firm, let's say you have contractors that you pay to come in and do maintenance on your equipment, or you have lots of supplies coming in, you have freight costs, shipping costs, etc. That's not covered under PPP. So idle can be very important for a lot of businesses. PPP is very attractive because of the forgiveness, but then it's also only for 8 weeks. So that's kind of a snapshot of the differences between the two, JJ.
Thanks, Tim. And another big difference I understand is the EIDL, you apply directly through the Small Business Administration. And like you mentioned before, with the PPP, you go to your SBA approved lender.
Yes, exactly right. An interesting point that folks might like to know, any given year, there's about 150 or so lenders here in the Houston district that are supporting the SBA lending programs. Right now, that's right around 400. So we have more than doubled in the last 14 days. You also might be interested to know that in Montgomery County, I'm looking over here at some information, $171 million, 713 PPP loans, and that's only as of the end of the day, April 9th. What the total is right now, I don't know. I don't have current data because we've put all of our energy into making sure the money was getting dispersed and getting pushed through the banks and through the SBA lending, direct lending programs to get to businesses. So I should have more data soon, but I think that's very encouraging. $171 million in just 14 days. Oh, well, that wasn't 14, that was in 5 days.
And those are loans that have been approved, and we're starting to see some of those funds actually show up and get to the businesses.
Exactly so. Yep, the requirement with PPP to the SBA lenders is we wanted them to expedite everything. We delegated so it would be done quickly and it would get approved as fast as possible. After the approval, we require them to disperse money within 10 days. They don't have to disperse all of it, but they at least need to begin dispersing to the affected business within 10 days. And considering the first loans were approved on April the 3rd, but right now there are people that are getting their disbursements.
Tim, could you address, there was some information that came out last week about the EIDL payment cap, that there was a $15,000 term mentioned, and that was,
Yep.
that caused a few calls to our office.
Yeah, I bet it did. And thank you for bringing that to my attention last week, or whenever that was. Feels like it was just yesterday. What that worked out to, under the normal disaster circumstances, you apply for an economic injury disaster loan, you get approved. Within a week of approval, we will push to you at least $25,000 as your initial disbursement to get you going, to be able to put money in your hands. What happened with the economic injury disaster loan is we changed that aspect so that rather than it being just an outright $25,000, it is 2 months worth of operating costs up to $15,000. And we did that specifically to be able to spread the amount of money available as wide as possible so that the maximum number of businesses can receive some immediate relief.
Thanks, Tim. This question comes from one of our local restaurants. Why is it taking so long to get the SBA loan? I don't know if they mean an idle loan or the PPP loan, but they are forced to close without it. They're having difficulty with utilizing the loan program for payroll when the law doesn't allow them to be open and have employees to pay.
Right. Okay. Well, first, you don't have to be open. All that we care about with, for instance, the PPP is that you are putting pay into people's hands, whether they can come to the office, or rather in this case, the restaurant, or not. I'll give you an example of a bakery that I'm aware of. They received the PPP funding and they were not able to open their doors because of a stay at home. But what they did is they brought staff into their bakery, they baked the things that they bake, and then they either delivered, and what they couldn't deliver to people at home, they were able to donate to appropriate food shelters and food pantries, which got them some incredible publicity so that the people in the market will remember them when all this is over, and hopefully will also be very interested in going to that bakery to thank them for their kindness during the disaster. Not everybody can do that, but point being, you don't actually have to put them back at work. We just want you to pay them. Now, so far as the timing, PPP is very fast, has been very fast. Approvals are happening just at record pace. In the last 14 days, which is as long as PPP has existed, the SBA has been able to push out 14 times the volume of money that we would normally have been doing in an annual basis. So it's been just an incredible amount of money pushed out to businesses. Economic injury disaster loan, it does take a little longer. Right now, as I told you, the normal process is about a week, you get contacted, and within about 4 weeks, things are resolved. There's a loan document in your hands, you sign it, and we get going. That's probably taking a little longer right now because of the just unprecedented, and I hate using that phrase because it's so overused right now, but it's true, unprecedented disaster that we've got. But it is moving very fast. We have huge teams that are working on this. We've augmented those teams with contract people, with a variety of other folks, and we have capabilities now that we simply didn't even have a year ago.
Thanks, Tim. Another question we have is from a small construction company. They've applied for the PPP through their bank on April 3rd, but they're having issues getting information from their bank, and they obviously need the loan. They've got 11 employees with limited cash flow, and they're not sure what to do. What advice would you have for that company in that situation?
Okay. You know, well, unfortunately today, there's not a lot they can do since PPP has been depleted. Had I talked to them yesterday or the day before, depending on the institution you're working with, I might have encouraged you to apply at a different place. If you weren't able to get information from your lender, understanding none of the lenders are ignoring anyone. They're working as hard and as fast as they can. But in the time that they would normally get, let's say, 100 loan applications, some of them are getting 5,000 loan applications. And to be able to handle that volume of work is not really possible to do in that time frame. So they're working as hard and fast as they can. If you just have a total information vacuum from your lender, then it may make sense to just go to a different lender. On my website, again, it's not helpful to you right now because PPP is not currently funded, but you can find a list of the normal 200 or so lenders that we have in the Houston market. And one of the columns on that list shows you which of those lenders are willing to take brand new customers, ones that don't have current banking relationships with. And that gives you another recourse, someone else that you can talk to that may not have the volumes of activity going on that maybe your current bank has. I think it's important that you have a good banking relationship. Working with a good banker is important to a small business. They want you to grow. They want you to be successful. They have a vested interest in your success. But these are unusual times. It may call for unusual actions. So that would have been my advice.
Thanks, Tim. And just to catch everyone up who's on the call or may have joined late or hasn't heard the latest news, when Tim refers to the PPP program being capped out, that was that $349 billion CARES package that that Congress passed and President Trump signed into law. That $349 billion has been reached. That limit has been reached. But Senator Cornyn earlier talked about hope that there could be a vote today to increase that amount by another $250 billion. So let's hope that gets passed as soon as we can, because the businesses do need the money. Tim, our next question is, what will the next level of financial support look like for smaller companies and companies, and also companies that have over 500 employees?
Okay, let me take the second half first. If you have over 500 employees, you may still be small. One of the first things you see when you look at either the PPP or the EIDL loan is this statement, do you have fewer than 500 employees? But here in the Houston area, we know that we have refiners and we have manufacturers that commonly have more than 500 employees. And sometimes, it may surprise you to know this, up to 1,500 employees, you are still considered small by the U.S. Small Business Administration. So you shouldn't let that slow you down at all. You would go to SBA's webpage and look up our size tables. You can just Google that, SBA size tables. Look at your industry, and you might find out that the standard for your industry is 1,000 or 1,250 or 1,500 employees. In addition to that, though, the Federal Reserve, along with a couple of other agencies, is launching something called the Main Street Funding Program. I honestly don't know any details about it since it's not an SBA program, but it is an additional or incremental program to be able to put money into the hands of businesses to help them get through this. I would encourage you to check that out. I'm sorry I don't have more details to share, but that could be of use to you. And never mind what the government is doing right now to help you with, or the SBA with EIDL and PPP. There are some other things available depending on where you live. Here in the Houston area, there's a small collection of banks that are doing up to $25,000 6-month term loans to try to get you through this. If that amount of money would be meaningful to you, that's with the Galveston Economic Development Partnership. I think if you hit their webpage, there's information there about it. If you're a restaurant, the Texas Restaurant Association has a grant program. It's not a huge grant, but it is a grant, and it's there for you to apply for to see if it will help your business. If you're in the arts business, Allied Arts is doing a grants program. We've probably all heard on the news that Lift Fund has started something that has been promoted widely by the state of Texas. I think it is also up to, I think it's more than 25, it may be 35. I don't know the terms, it's not an SBA program, but it is a reasonable amount of money. And it also could help you be able to get your business through the next few months so that you can be healthy on the other end of it.
Thank you, Tim. Our next question is, the PPP interim final rule states that lenders must confirm the dollar amount of average monthly payroll costs for the preceding calendar year by reviewing the payroll documentation submitted with the borrower's application. Does that require the lender to replicate every borrower's calculations?
Well, it really just, as it says, it requires them to confirm it, whatever actions are necessary. I think in a typical situation with, let's say, a person that's got 10 employees, is you're going to have payroll records. Those payroll records are going to give total payroll for the last 12 months. Beyond that, it's fairly simple to divide that by 12 and multiply by 2.5, and that should give you the amount for a PPP loan. So the easy answer is yes, we do expect you to take a look at that and make sure it is correct. With that said, the IFR also says that we are holding the banks harmless, that if they, in all good faith, check those numbers and they say they're okay, If later we find out that the small business actually used erroneous data, then we're not going to hold the bank liable for that. We only want them to look at whatever that is presented to them by that small business. Once again, so that in a really expedited way, money can flow through the banks through the PPP program and into the hands of the small business.
Do the PPP loans cover paid sick leave?
They do. They do. In fact, I think that's one of the first bullets in the CARES Act that they want PPP money to be able to be used for is to, if you've got somebody affected by COVID and they have to stay home for 14 days in self-quarantine or what have you. Absolutely. Yes.
Thanks, Tim. This next question is, my small business is a seasonal business whose activity increases from April to June. Considering activity from that period would be a more accurate reflection of my business's operations. However, my small business was not fully ramped up on February 15th of 2020. Am I still eligible?
Yeah, so since you said February 15th, that must mean they're talking about a PPP loan because January 31 would be the operative date for an economic injury disaster loan. And yeah, so we have in the guidance not special approaches, but the examples and the approach to use for seasonal employees. If you are really only super active for 3 months a year, and then we look at your average annual wages and apply that across the year, yeah, as you point out, then it might require you to have more employees now than you want and fewer employees than when you need it. So there is an allowance in the guidance to the lenders so that they can work with you on the seasonal characteristics of your business and get you some PPP funding in the way that makes the most sense.
Okay. And do lenders have to use a promissory note provided by SBA, or may they use their own?
They can use their own, absolutely. Yeah, again, the purpose of making this a delegated lending program is for the banks to be able to use everything possible that they already use to make it simple for them. They do commercial loans all the time. So basically they would use their commercial lending process. And then with the guidance, they would make sure it complies with the guidance. And that's a vast oversimplification, but that's the idea. Just so that this will fit right into what they already do to get money out to businesses as fast as possible.
And the last question that I have today is, how does the $10 million cap and affiliation rules work for franchisees?
Well, it's simply a $10 million cap, irrespective. There is a special designation with PPP about hospitality and food service businesses that allows you to have up to 500 employees per location. So if I had a restaurant, Tim's Restaurant, and it had 10 locations and each one had 400 employees, then under the rules for PPP, I could apply for a separate PPP for each one of those locations. And if that's going to be a separate PPP, then that would imply that that is up to $10 million as well per location. So we tried to build in as much flexibility as we could to be as inclusive of every possible business type. And this one we're talking about is huge. Ordinarily, I talked about size standards earlier. The size standards for a full service restaurant is $8 million a year in revenue, whether you have one location or 100 locations. So the fact that it's been opened up this way makes it just a significantly more versatile and inclusive lending program. I do want to make one quick comment. I know that Miguel Lopez is on this conference call. And for those of you that don't know him, there in Montgomery County, he runs the Small Business Development Center. My biggest advice to you right now, you're probably even going to ask me this, JJ, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out, is, take this, as crazy as this is going to sound, take this as an opportunity. I hope you got some funding in place to help you. If you didn't, there are some other avenues that I mentioned you might be able to pursue. Even so, hopefully right now, when you can't be at full speed with your business, use the time to work with somebody like Miguel's team to help do a 30-day plan, a 60-day plan on getting through this disaster, but even more importantly, a plan going forward. What will you do differently with your business that you weren't doing a month ago or 2 months ago? Maybe there's some new efficiencies that you can implement. Maybe there's a new pricing model that's going to be able to yield greater profitability, or maybe there's a whole new social media strategy that you need to employ now. You always wanted to do it, but you never had the time. Well, now you do. So this can turn into an opportunity for your business to make it even stronger and make it even more robust. This will be over. And when this is over, it is my desire that every business on this call is stronger, is robust, and prospers. And I think that with the help of people like Miguel at the Small Business Development Center and our other resource partners in Houston, like the SCORE organization and the Women's Business Center, I think you can do that.
Well, Tim, as usual, any talk with you is informative, and I know this has been, you've been burning the midnight oil, both you and your team. We appreciate you being here. Is there anything that you'd like to say to wrap us up?
I think that was really it. I want everybody to stay tuned. I certainly can't tell you what's going to happen with Congress, but I am an eternal optimist. I refuse to be pessimistic. So I believe that there will be more help on the way. What my team is doing right now is we are orienting ourselves towards that occurrence. If that occurs, we want the lenders completely ready to push whatever amount Congress gives us through with PPP. Economic injury disaster loan comes back online with more funding, then we want to get all the small businesses that want to pursue that ready, capable of entering their application the second that it comes back online. And SBDC is one of the ways we're doing that. And we've been doing up to 8 webinars a day for the public to explain about these programs. We've cut that back a lot because most people have entertained one or both, and they've gone that direction. But we're not going to discontinue them. If you were to go to the one that's going to happen today at 3 o'clock, I think you'll find it's much shorter, but we are still making sure they're aware of all the things that they can do right now to help their business through this, and not just EIDL and PPP. So stay tuned. I'm completely optimistic that great things are going to happen soon.
Yeah, Tim, thank you. Thank you again for being here. And Mr. Gil Staley with the Woodlands Area Economic Development Partnership, it's been a pleasure to co-host today's program with you. And again, we are very collaborative organizations. We always try to work together to help out the business community in our area. So thank you all for attending today. And Gil, do you have anything you want to add?
That's all. And thank you again for everyone who participated. We were up to 124 at one point, so that's fabulous.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. And I share Tim and I know Gil's optimism as well that there is an end to this, and it is it's going to be something where I think we will come out with some real lessons learned, and we'll be better for that. So again, thank you everybody for joining today, and have a good rest of the day.
Good day.